The 22 million person country of Sri Lanka has been experiencing unrest. The president has overthrown by protesters who took the streets, forcing him to quit and forcing the nation to proclaim a state of emergency. Since attaining independence in 1948, the nation is currently experiencing its biggest financial crisis. If you are wondering how that happened, how did things get so bad? The solution is very easy. Food prices went soared by up to 80%. To stretch their food budgets, more than 60% of Sri Lankans have already reduced the number of meals they eat. In a terrible illustration of extremes, some helpless people must go to in order to feed. Some families walk nearly 10 kilometers to a communal kitchen in Colombo to receive a free supper. A crisis is imminent when people must borrow money to meet their most basic requirements, like putting food on the table. In addition, there was a fuel scarcity, which required long lines for people to fill up their tanks, and there were ongoing power outages. The situation deteriorated further. Except for vital services, the nation stopped selling gasoline. As a result of the protesters breaking into the president's house, the nation's international debts were not paid. There is little doubt that the nation's leaders have mishandled the crisis, but that is only one side of the story. The other is that if things stay the same, the world will face a food and energy catastrophe. One of several nations that will likely fall in the near future may be Sri Lanka. 28% of the world's wheat, 29% of the world's barley, 15% of the world's maize, and 75% of the world's sunflower oil are supplied by Russia and Ukraine. If these supplies were to disappear from the market, there would be hundreds of millions of starving people prepared to overtake presidential residences. There is very little left to lose when nothing is on the table. On the verge of starvation are up to 250 million people, and hundreds of millions more are being forced into poverty because they must now spend a bigger portion of their income on food. Lebanon, Tunisia, and Egypt buy the majority of their cereals from Ukraine. The issue is that Odessa port or Mariupol is used by more than 90% of Ukrainian exports. One is totally under Russian control, while Russian ships blocking the other do not allow Ukrainian ships to pass. In addition, the United States and its allies put harsh sanctions on Russia that restricted its capacity to export wheat, added to the market shortfall, and raised food prices. Russia is the best seller of fertilizers in the world, but in an effort to put pressure on the West, it banned fertilizer exports, which exacerbated the shortage of wheat and raised prices. This caused many nations to impose export restrictions on necessities like wheat, which only made matters worse. Why is inflation rising? This is your responsibility. Wheat, barley, and other essential commodities are in limited supply worldwide, which is raising prices across the board, not just in the US. As a result, just because the Fed increased interest rates, inflation won't necessarily decrease. Asset prices will probably decline for the reasons we've discussed. The Fed managed to stop asset inflations after 10 years, but it has limited control over consumer prices. Russia's invasion of Ukraine did not cause an increase in the price of food globally. After rains delayed planting last year, China, the world's largest producer of wheat, has stated that this crop may be its worst ever. Extreme heat in India, the second largest producer in the world, and a lack of rain pose a threat to the yields of other bread baskets, from the wheat belt of America to the regions of France. The greatest drought to hit the Horn of America in 4 decades is wreaking havoc there. This is a recipe for disaster when coupled with the disruption of global supply system. However, given that Ukraine had moved a large portion of its crop from the last summer before the fighting and that Russia is continuing to sell its grain despite higher prices and dangers for shippers, the situation is not as dire as it could be. What is the big deal? Winter is approaching, which is the most terrifying reality. Russia won't be afraid to use wheat as a weapon to deter the West from backing Ukraine and eventually declaring victory in its pretended military operation if the war doesn't end by winter. If the war doesn't end by winter, Ukraine's next shipments won't be leaving Ukrainian territory. Food cost will soar if it comes to it, and the inflation rate of 9.1% will be regarded as the good old days. That's not the worst case scenario though. If Russia reduces its supply, JP Morgan predicts that oil prices will reach the $380 mark for the first time ever. After the United States and Saudi Arabia, Russia is the third largest oil producer with daily production of over 10.8 million barrels compared to daily consumption of a little over 3 million barrels. Theoretically, Russia has the ability to reduce its oil output by over 7 million barrels in order to raise oil prices and put pressure on the West to stop aiding Kiev. Experts estimate that a 3 million barrel reduction in Russia's daily production would raise crude prices to $190. That is almost twice what they currently cost. The worst case scenario calls for a daily reduction of 5 million barrels, which could result in stratospheric crude oil prices of $380. Because of the high price of oil, Putin's government will already be making more money than ever and can easily afford to reduce output during the coldest part of the year. If the past several months have taught us anything, it is that Russia is battling and unable to defeat the Ukrainian resistance, and that is prepared to take whatever means necessary to oust Kiev. Food prices would rise to previously unheard of levels at an oil price of $380 per barrel. Such exorbitant pricing would sharply reduce demand, which will harm business earnings and result in more unemployment and an unprecedented recession. The biggest commercial partner of the United States, Europe, might easily enter a recession this winter. Even while Europe says it will completely stop using Russian gas, doing so in practice is much more difficult than the most people realize. It lacks the necessary infrastructure to carry out it. German manufacturers have been dependent on inexpensive Russian gas over the past few decades, while many European nations are currently reducing their reliance on Russian gas. Doing so in a few months when demand for gas will increase as people start to heat their homes for the winter would considerably more challenging. Natural gas cannot be simply imported. To be able to import natural gas, you need the necessary infrastructure, which takes years and billions of dollars to create and which Europe most certainly won't be able to do by the upcoming winter. Therefore, if Russia intends to use natural gas as a weapon in the upcoming winter, that might cause a recession in Europe. And as the EU is the US top trading partner and China's second largest export market, that will have a significant negative impact on both the US and China's economies. If the global food and energy challenges aren't resolved, the collapse of Sri Lanka is just the beginning. The Fed is getting ready to hike rates by another 0.75 basis points to further reduce demand as the globe is going to experience such a calamity. Predictions are extremely tough at this point because so much depends on how Russia's invasion of Ukraine plays out. However, one thing is for certain. If things keep going as they are, a recession or perhaps stagflation is unavoidable. What have you learned as a result of our discussion? Please let me know by leaving a comment below. And if you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe to Wealth-ology for more videos like this. Thank you for stopping by to watch. See you in our next video. Bye!